Hello again, everybody. We're starting lesson 10. This is our introduction, just to give you a heads up on what this class is going to be about. And we'll meet again when we continue in the next video. The question here is new directions in contemporary Israeli society and culture. And we have a specific purpose in looking at new directions in contemporary Israeli society and culture. As you'll have understood by now, our whole analysis of Israel education is connected to the notion that Zionist education is the foundation of Israel education, but that the experiences since the foundation of the State of Israel and the evolution of the Zionist ideology have drawn our attention to some fundamental flaws or some fundamental questions that really need to be addressed in order to make Israel education viable in the context of the way in which Jewish history has played out and the way in which Jews live in the world today. Fundamentally, we are aware of this question of the relationship with the diaspora, the negation of the diaspora. That's the first. The second that we've spoken about is the whole question of the Western leaning of Zionist ideology, and the third is the question of the conflict in the Middle East, which is definitive of a problem that Zionism faces, because essentially the Zionist movement wanted to give the Jewish people the opportunity to live a stable and peaceful future. Living a life of conflict in the Middle East is not necessarily a fulfillment of that. What we're going to try and do in this class is look at specific examples of things that are happening inside Israeli society. They're not necessarily the most important historical events. They're not necessarily the things that are going on in the world and in the press today, but they are there in Israel, and we're picking them out because they're examples of ways in which Israeli society, either consciously or not consciously, is grappling with some of the significant questions that the flaws of the Zionist ideology in our context face. So introduction, the first thing we'll do is to lay out those issues. A strategic approach to the rethinking of the role of contemporary Israel in curriculum essentially is an opportunity to think about the issues that we're going to highlight here as things that you can be teaching, not necessarily because of their quantitative importance, because of their qualitative significance. What are the examples that we're going to look at? The unnegating of the diaspora, such as campaigns targeted to Yordim. That's a really interesting process. How does Israel deal with its Yordim? How does Israel think about the people who have left the State of Israel, and what's the relationship to that kind of diaspora? The official relations with the diaspora have significantly evolved and changed, certainly over the last 60 years, but it's even noticeable in the last 10 years. Israel has started to think strategically about the relationship with the diaspora, not just as a resource, but as part of the identity of the Jewish people. Attitudes about the fallen in the army, the reconstruction of Israeli identity in its militaristic form in the founding ideology of the state, has a lot to say about what the Israeli soldier stereotypically looks like. That's something that's changed, particularly with attitudes to the dead and the ways in which Israeli soldiers are supposed to respond to the loss of life. The same thing is true to the attitudes of Jewish history in the diaspora. The Zionist narrative told the story of the past in a very specific way. There are some really striking examples of how that story has been rewritten. One that really stands out is the reconstruction of Yad Vashem. 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, the story was completely retold. And the new museum tells a very different story of the Holocaust from the old museum, and it's an example of a reevaluation of how Israelis think about the diaspora. It's a big theme. Another question is the question of Israeli culture and globalization. What's the connection between Israeli society and Western civilization? How do Israelis relate to the rest of the world? That has a significant statement embedded in it in the context of how we deal with the relationship between Israel and the diaspora. So the themes that these allow us to look at: the de-Westernization of Zionism. Not all the Jews living in Israel are Western. Israel is not only a Western country. The de-Westernization of Zionism is a crucial reevaluation of one of the flaws, and this will bring us to the conclusions, after which we will move on to our next session.